The galaxy was dying, or at least that's how it felt in the heart of the Galactic Council chambers. The shattered rift, a massive tear in space-time, had begun to grow, devouring star systems and cutting off vital trade routes. Planets once teeming with life were being isolated, their people left to suffocate in the void. Worse still, no one knew what caused the rift or how to stop it. In the midst of this cosmic chaos, Earth stood out as an unlikely beacon of hope. For centuries, humanity had been a fledgling force, slowly carving its place among the galaxy's many species. But now, Earth had the technology and the resolve to face challenges no one else dared to confront. The Galactic Council, fractured and divided, had no choice but to turn to the humans. Captain Alina Royce stood at the head of the Resolute Horizon, a cutting-edge warship now tasked with the most dangerous mission humanity had ever faced, to find the source of the rift and repair it. Earth's most brilliant minds, scientists, engineers, and diplomats, had been assembled aboard the ship, ready to take on a problem that had stumped the galaxy's greatest minds for centuries. But not everyone was eager to follow humanity's lead. As Royce paced the command deck of the Resolute Horizon, the silence was broken by the harsh tone of the comm system. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission from the Galactic Council," said Lieutenant Darla Cade, her fingers flying over the console. "Put it through," Royce ordered, her voice calm but unwavering. She knew this call would change everything. The screen flickered to life, revealing the faces of the Galactic Council members. The holograms of various alien species loomed over the table, their expressions somber. The leader of the council, an imposing figure from the silicon-based craft, spoke first. "Captain Royce, Earth's response has been unexpected. You stand as our last hope. The rift cannot be ignored any longer. It must be contained." Royce's eyes narrowed. She could feel the weight of their words, but there was something else beneath the surface, something more political than scientific. "The rift is destabilizing our entire galaxy," another member, a tall, fur-covered Jorxian, chimed in. "We've tried everything, but it's out of our control. Earth's technology, well, your technology, is our only chance." The craft leader turned to Royce, his multiple eyes glimmering with an unreadable expression. "If you fail, Captain, we will all fall. The rift will take everything." Alina nodded slowly, her jaw clenched. "We won't fail. I'll personally ensure that the mission succeeds." There was a collective murmur, a mix of doubt and hope. As the transmission ended, Royce felt the full weight of the task ahead settle on her shoulders. It wasn't just a mission to save the galaxy. It was a mission to prove that Earth deserved its place among the stars. "We're approaching the rift, Captain," Lieutenant Cade's voice snapped Royce from her thoughts. She glanced out the observation window, where the vast, swirling expanse of the rift loomed ahead. It was a chaotic, mesmerizing sight. Purple and blue energy cascaded around the tier, lighting up the void in a kaleidoscope of colors. The Resolute Horizon shuddered slightly as it entered the rift's gravitational field. A low hum resonated through the ship's hull as the sensors began to beep furiously. "We're in," Cade said, voice tight. "All systems are stable for now, but we're flying blind. The rift's disturbances are messing with our instruments." Royce didn't flinch. She had been in tight spots before, but this was different. "Keep us steady, Lieutenant. Let's see what we're up against." As the ship ventured deeper into the rift, it felt like the universe itself was watching them, waiting for them to succeed or fail. Royce knew one thing for certain: there was no turning back now. This was humanity's moment. And if they couldn't fix the rift, nothing else would matter. The Resolute Horizon sliced through the heart of the shattered rift, its sleek hull trembling against the unseen forces tugging at its very existence. Outside, the void was alive with chaotic energy, shifting, unpredictable, as though the rift itself were a living creature constantly evolving. Streaks of blue and violet light rippled across the viewports, casting eerie shadows on the ship's walls. Captain Alina Royce stood at the command station, her hands clasped behind her back, watching as the rift stretched endlessly before them. Her crew moved with practiced efficiency, but she could feel the tension in the air. Everyone knew that every moment they spent inside this unknown realm pushed them closer to the point of no return. "Captain, we're picking up strange gravitational anomalies," Lieutenant Cade reported, her voice laced with concern as she analyzed the data. "It's like the rift's gravitational field is constantly shifting, pulling us in different directions. We'll need to recalibrate our trajectory every few minutes to avoid being pulled off course." Royce nodded, her mind already calculating the best course of action. They'd known the rift would be unstable, but this was something else, something far worse. They had no map, no clear understanding of the forces at play here. The only way to survive was to keep moving forward. "Understood," Royce said. "We'll adjust course as necessary. Keep an eye on our velocity. We don't want to end up in a subspace pocket or worse." A strange hum reverberated through the hull, faint but constant. Lieutenant Juno Venn, the ship's chief engineer, glanced up from her console, eyes wide. "I'm seeing fluctuations in the warp core," Venn said, her voice tight. "The energy levels are off. I've never seen anything like it. It's as if the rift is feeding on our power." Royce's gaze flicked toward the ship's status readouts. The Resolute Horizon was designed to handle extreme conditions, but the rift was proving to be more than a challenge. She had to make a decision, and fast. "Can we increase output to counteract the rift's interference?" Royce asked, already anticipating the risk. Venn hesitated, her fingers flying over the control panel. "We can, but it'll put a strain on the engines. It'll make the ship more vulnerable to spatial distortions. We'll be flying blind even more than we already are." Royce's mind raced. Vulnerability wasn't an option. They needed to be prepared for anything the rift could throw at them. But if they didn't act now, they risked being lost in the uncharted chaos of the rift forever. "Do it," she ordered firmly. "We have no choice. Keep us moving." The ship's engines hummed louder, its energy output spiking as Venn initiated the necessary adjustments. For a moment, the whole crew braced for something catastrophic. The tension was unbearable. Then the ship shuddered, and the instruments began to glow brighter, responding to the increased energy. For a fleeting moment, it felt as though they were slipping through the cracks of reality itself. Outside the viewport, the rift seemed to twist and warp, as if aware of their intrusion. Suddenly, the sensors lit up, an alarming proximity warning blaring across the command deck. "Captain," Cade shouted, "we've got an energy storm heading straight for us, moving at an incredible speed." Royce's heart skipped a beat. The rift wasn't just unstable, it was actively trying to destroy them. "Evade," Royce barked. "All hands, brace for impact." The Resolute Horizon lurched as Cade and the rest of the crew fought to stabilize the ship. Outside, the energy storm loomed larger, a twisting column of raw power, like a tornado made of light and electricity. It had no definite form, constantly shifting, growing, and shrinking. As the ship fought to outrun the storm, it was clear that their options were running out. They couldn't avoid this forever. And with the rift growing more unstable by the second, the crew would have to make some dangerous decisions soon. "We need to get closer to the rift's core," Royce said, her voice low and resolute. "That's where we'll find answers. If we stay here, we won't survive the storm." Cade nodded, understanding the gravity of the order. She pushed the ship to its limits, the Resolute Horizon screeching against the forces pulling at it. Just as it seemed the storm would overtake them, the ship broke through the edge of the maelstrom and into a deep, silent void. The calm was almost worse than the chaos they'd just escaped. Before them, a massive structure loomed out of the darkness, an ancient beacon pulsing with energy, its surface covered in symbols and markings that no one on board recognized. "This is it," Royce whispered, her voice almost reverent. The source of the rift. But even as she spoke, something shifted in the darkness. The ship's hull vibrated ominously, and the beacon's lights flickered. Someone, was waiting for them. The silence that followed their arrival at the mysterious beacon felt oppressive. The ship drifted in the void, the faint hum of the engines the only sound breaking the eerie stillness. The massive structure loomed ahead, an ancient monolith that seemed both alive and inert, its surface glimmering with strange alien energy. Captain Royce stood at the bridge's observation window, her eyes narrowed in concentration. She had expected danger, but this was different. This wasn't just a relic of a bygone civilization. It was something far more intricate, an enigma that felt more like a trap than a discovery. "Status report, Lieutenant Cade," Royce said, her voice steady but carrying an edge of concern. Cade was focused on her console, eyes flicking between readouts as she analyzed the ship's sensors. The beacon is emitting a low-frequency signal. It's unlike anything we've encountered. It's not just technology, it's alive, Captain. I'm picking up energy signatures that suggest it's been active for millennia. But it's not sending out a distress signal. It's watching us. Watching us? Royce's brow furrowed. Explain. It's like a sentient system, Cade continued, her tone a mixture of awe and trepidation. The signal pulses with intelligence, almost as if it's aware of us. Every time we try to get a closer read, it changes its frequency, as though adapting to our presence. Royce's instincts flared. They were being tested. Or worse, they were being lured into something they couldn't comprehend. "Lieutenant Venn," Royce called, turning toward the ship's engineer. "Can you get us a visual feed of the structure? We need to get eyes on it." Venn hesitated for a moment, her fingers hovering over the console. "I'll have to reroute power through the external sensors, but it'll give us a weak connection. We may lose the feed in a few minutes." "Do it," Royce ordered. The lights on the bridge flickered briefly before the large display screen lit up, showing a live feed of the beacon. The structure was massive, larger than any known starship or space station. Its surface was covered in alien symbols etched into the metal and stone in a way that suggested ancient craftsmanship beyond anything humanity had ever seen. As the camera zoomed in, the symbols seemed to shift, subtly rearranging themselves in patterns that defied logic. Royce's eyes locked onto them, feeling the hairs on the back of her neck rise. There was something hypnotic about the way they moved. "Captain, we're picking up another anomaly," Cade said urgently. "The rift's energy fluctuations are spiking. Something's happening, something big." Before Royce could respond, the ship jolted violently. The lights on the bridge flickered, and alarms began to blare. A deep, rumbling sound emanated from the depths of the ship, followed by a strange, low-frequency hum that seemed to resonate in the bones of everyone aboard. "What the hell was that?" Venn shouted, stumbling as the ship rocked. "The beacon," Cade said, her voice filled with alarm. "It's reacting to us. It's sending out a pulse, like it's alive." Suddenly, the feed on the display went static, and the ship was plunged into darkness. The hum intensified, vibrating through the walls as if the very fabric of space was being torn apart. Then, without warning, a blinding light shot from the beacon, enveloping the resolute horizon. "Brace for impact," Royce commanded, her voice steady despite the chaos. The ship trembled as the energy pulse hit, the hull groaning under the strain. Royce's eyes darted between the crew, each member gritting their teeth, trying to maintain control. The ship was pushing the limits of its structural integrity. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. "Lieutenant Cade, report," Royce snapped. Cade's hands moved frantically over her console, trying to make sense of the readouts. I don't know. The energy pulse is messing with everything. The systems are failing. We've lost propulsion." Before she could finish, the lights flickered back on, and the ship stilled. A strange silence followed, broken only by the crew's uneven breaths. Royce's heart pounded in her chest as she assessed the situation. They were still alive, but something had changed. "We're in the middle of the rift now," Royce muttered. "There's no turning back. Prepare for whatever comes next." Cade turned toward the captain, her expression hardening. "We've never faced anything like this before. We need to know what this structure is, and why it's sending out these pulses." Royce nodded grimly. "Get me a team ready to go out there. We're going to learn everything we can about this place. Whatever it is, it's connected to the rift, and it holds the key to stopping it." As Royce stepped away from the bridge, the crew began preparing for the next phase of the mission. The ship was battered, but they were still alive, just barely. They were about to venture deeper into the heart of the unknown. And whatever awaited them, it would test them all in ways they couldn't even begin to imagine. The resolute horizon lay silent in the shadow of the ancient beacon, its hull barely holding together after the violent pulse that had rocked the ship. The crew was on edge, their nerves frayed from the chaotic events, but Royce knew they couldn't afford to hesitate. The ship's sensors were still scrambled, and they had no way of knowing what other dangers lay ahead. But if they were going to fix the rift, they had no choice but to press on. "Captain," Lieutenant Cade's voice crackled through the comms. "We've stabilized the ship as much as we can, but we've lost most of our external systems. We can't send any more recon drones. We'll need to go out manually." Royce nodded, her gaze fixed on the holographic map of the beacon. The time for cautious exploration was over. "Prepare an away team. We're going in." A quiet murmur of agreement passed through the crew, and soon Royce was suited up in her personal armor, flanked by Lieutenant Cade, Lieutenant Venn, and a small squad of seasoned Marines. They would be the first to step foot on the mysterious structure, and whatever they found could mean the difference between saving the galaxy or watching it tear itself apart. The airlock hissed as the door opened, revealing the abyss outside. Royce took a deep breath, her heart pounding. The darkness beyond was absolute. There was no stars, no galaxies, just the cold, black void of the rift. It felt like the ship itself was an island, stranded in the middle of an ocean of nothingness. "We'll follow the magnetic anchor," Royce instructed, her voice steady despite the creeping uncertainty. "Stay close, no one gets separated." With a synchronized movement, the team moved out of the ship, stepping onto the surface of the beacon. It was cold and metallic, the texture like smooth stone, yet unnaturally smooth, almost unnatural. The surface hummed with energy beneath their boots, sending faint vibrations through their suits. Every footstep echoed, amplified in the oppressive silence. Lieutenant Cade's voice cut through the stillness. "Captain, I'm getting more readings. There are structures embedded in the surface, not just symbols. It looks like something was built here by something advanced." Royce nodded, her gaze sweeping over the sprawling expanse. Jagged ridges of metallic surface jutted out from beneath the layers of energy pulses, their sharp angles indicating a design far beyond any human or galactic civilization. Some of the markings seemed to shift again, reacting to their presence. Ven's eyes narrowed, her fingers twitching with the urge to examine every detail. "I don't like this. It's like it's adapting to us. The more we walk, the more it changes." "Focus on the core," Royce said firmly. "That's where we'll find answers." The group pushed forward, heading toward the center of the beacon. It was massive, towering high above them, with tendrils of energy spiraling around its central spire. The closer they got, the more the pulse of energy seemed to resonate within their own bodies. It wasn't just technology they were up against. It was something alive, something with a purpose. Finally, they reached the central structure. A massive door loomed before them, its surface covered in the same shifting symbols they'd seen throughout the structure. The door appeared to be sealed shut, but it thrummed with energy, as though waiting for them to make the next move. Lieutenant Cade approached cautiously, her hands hovering over the symbols. "I think this is it," she murmured, running her gloved fingers over the surface. "I can almost feel it responding to us." this is more than just a door, it's a threshold. Royce's voice was firm as she stepped forward, placing her hand on the cold surface. Open it. Cade hesitated, then tapped a sequence of symbols with precise movements. The door shimmered, and for a brief moment, it looked like the entire structure shuddered. Then, with a low rumble, the door slid open, revealing a vast chamber beyond. The room was filled with an impossible combination of technologies, alien machinery that seemed to defy the laws of physics and matter, suspended in midair by invisible forces. At the center of the room was a massive, pulsing orb of energy, crackling with power. It hovered in a suspended field, surrounded by intricate machinery that appeared to control and regulate its energy output. This was it, the heart of the rift. Captain, this is beyond anything I've ever seen, Ven whispered, awe and fear mixing in her voice. Royce's gaze never left the orb. It's the source, and if we can't control it, we'll never stop the rift. The chamber was silent now, save for the hum of the energy orb. It felt like time itself was suspended in this place, as if the very fabric of reality was on the edge of collapsing. Royce stepped forward, but a faint voice echoed in her mind, a whisper so soft, so distant, that she almost couldn't make it out. You're not meant to be here. She froze, her blood running cold. The voice came again, louder this time, accompanied by a low, vibrating hum that shook her to her core. Leave or die. The air around them shifted, warping like a mirage. This was no ordinary technology. This was a force that could break the galaxy in ways no one could predict. And now, they were trapped in its heart. The air in the chamber grew heavy, thick with an oppressive presence. The hum of the energy orb intensified, its pulsing rhythm resonating through the very bones of the crew. Royce's hand instinctively reached for her sidearm, but something stopped her, a subtle warning that something far greater than any weapon was at play here. Leave or die. The voice echoed again in her mind, the words now unmistakably clear. It wasn't a human voice, nor any language she knew, but it felt familiar, like a primal instinct that had been buried deep within her consciousness for eons. It was a voice that spoke from beyond the stars, from the very fabric of the universe itself. Captain, Cade's voice was strained, her hand pressed to her helmet, as if trying to block out the overwhelming sensation. I don't think this is just a warning. I think it's alive. It's speaking to us. We need to leave now. Royce didn't move. Her eyes remained fixed on the orb, the center of the rift, as if it were pulling at her very soul. The symbols that had once been a mystery now seemed to glow with a new purpose, shifting and changing in rhythm with the orb's pulse. The room seemed to breathe around them, the walls contracting and expanding with every beat. Captain, Ven said softly, but with urgency, there's something wrong. The gravity in here, it's fluctuating. If we don't leave now, we'll be trapped in this place. Royce didn't respond immediately. She was still processing the voice in her mind, still trying to make sense of the sensation it invoked. Was it a warning or a challenge? What was this force, and why was it reaching out to them? But as the words echoed in her mind again, leave or die, she knew that hesitation could be their undoing. This was not just an alien artifact. It was alive, and it was powerful. We need to shut it down, Royce said, her voice resolute. Cade, what can we do to stop it? Cade glanced at the holographic interface embedded in her wrist, her fingers flying over the controls in a blur. There's no manual override. The energy readings are off the charts. If I try to shut it down now, it could trigger an explosion that would tear this whole place apart. We don't know enough about this technology to safely deactivate it. Royce's mind raced, but her resolve remained firm. Then we'll need to understand it. Fast. She stepped forward, ignoring the growing pressure in the air, the sensation that the room was closing in on them. The orb's pulse quickened, and she could feel it, like a heartbeat, each thrum reverberating through her chest. Her hand hovered near her sidearm, but she resisted the urge to draw it. The orb was not a threat she could fight. It was something else, something far beyond their understanding. "Then," she said, "can you analyze the machinery around the orb? See if there's anything we can use to control it, anything that might give us an edge." Ven nodded, her expression determined. "I'll try, but Captain, this is unlike anything we've ever encountered. It feels like it's testing us." As Ven approached the closest console, Cade began scanning the orb's energy signature, her mind working furiously to decipher the impossible data streaming across her helmet's HUD. But the pattern seemed to shift every time she focused on them, a deliberate confusion designed to keep them from understanding. "Damn it," Cade muttered, frustration seeping into her voice. "It's like it knows we're trying to analyze it. It's changing, adapting. We're not going to get anywhere at this rate." Royce stepped closer to the orb, her mind focused solely on the task at hand. The voice, "Leave or die," had become a constant whisper, threading through her thoughts, like the very fabric of the rift itself was alive, breathing, watching. She could feel it now, its consciousness reaching out to her, probing her mind, testing her resolve. Then, as if in response to her defiance, the orb's pulse grew stronger. The walls of the chamber trembled, and the gravity fluctuations intensified. The air became thick, charged with energy, like static before a storm. The voice in her mind shifted, the tone now filled with something darker, more threatening. "You dare challenge the rift?" A wave of energy swept through the room, knocking the crew off their feet. Royce struggled to maintain her balance, her boots sliding on the smooth surface, but she refused to fall. This was the moment. They had no choice but to face whatever lay ahead. Cade, her voice strained, shouted over the chaos. "Captain, we're losing control. The whole structure is coming online. It's reacting to us." The room shook violently, and the floor beneath them began to crack. The orb's pulse intensified to an unbearable level, its energy coursing through the chamber like a living, breathing entity. Royce's vision blurred as the pressure mounted, her body feeling as if it were being pulled in all directions. The voice in her mind rose to a crescendo, the words no longer a whisper but a roar. "You will never leave here. The rift is eternal." In that moment, Royce understood. They weren't just dealing with an alien artifact. They were standing in the heart of the rift itself, a force that existed beyond the boundaries of space and time, and it was not going to let them go. But they couldn't give up, not now. "Stay focused," Royce barked, rallying the team as the room began to collapse around them. "We fight until the end. We're not leaving without answers." And as the orb's pulse reached its zenith, Royce prepared to face whatever nightmare lay beyond the rift's heart. The chamber buckled around them as the force of the orb's pulse intensified. The very walls seemed to twist in on themselves, shifting like molten metal, their once rigid edges now bending and warping. Royce struggled to keep her footing, her boots scraping against the cracked floor as gravity fluctuated wildly. It felt as though the entire beacon had become a living, breathing entity, its energy seeking to swallow them whole. "Captain," Cade shouted, struggling to hold her position, "we can't outrun this. The rift, it's expanding faster than we can handle. It's not just a structure, it's a conduit." Royce's eyes snapped to the swirling mass of energy at the center of the room. The orb pulsed with an ethereal light, its color shifting with each beat, its power radiating out in waves. Every pulse seemed to take something from the room, like it was draining the very essence of the rift itself, leaving nothing but void in its wake. "We need to shut it down, now." Ven's voice was urgent, her hands flying over her wrist console. "I'm tracing the energy flow, but I can't get a clear read on the core system. It's like it's blocking all attempts to interface with it." Royce's mind raced, but she couldn't afford to let panic set in. She knew they didn't have much time. The rift wasn't just a space anomaly. It was alive, evolving, and its expansion was an unstoppable force. But it wasn't just the physical threat of the collapsing structure that haunted her. The voice, the one that had warned them to leave, had grown louder in her mind, its words now impossible to ignore. "You dare challenge the rift?" It wasn't just a threat anymore. It was a command, a primal warning that reverberated through her consciousness, gnawing at the edges of her thoughts. And with each pulse of the orb, it seemed to tighten its grip on their very being. "We don't have time," Royce said, her voice steady despite the chaos unfolding around them. "We need to find the heart of this thing. It's the only way we'll stop it." Cade turned toward the central structure, her eyes filled with determination. "You're right. The beacon, it's not just a power source. I think it's controlling the expansion of the rift. If we can sever its link to the rest of the structure, we might be able to disrupt its hold on the galaxy." Royce nodded. "Do it, but make it fast. We're running out of options." With a flick of her wrist, Cade activated the command sequence. The interface on her wrist lit up with holographic readouts, but the symbols flickered erratically as though mocking her attempts. The rift's energy was everywhere now, suffusing the room with a steady hum that seemed to vibrate within their bones. "The system is rejecting the override." Cade gritted her teeth. "It's almost like it's adapting to us. I can't gain control without more data." Ven's eyes darted around the room, scanning the shifting patterns in the energy field. "There has to be something we're missing," she muttered, her voice filled with disbelief. "This isn't just technology, it's more than that. It's sentient." Royce's mind snapped to a conclusion, and her gaze fell upon the swirling energy around them. The rift wasn't just a malfunctioning system. It was a creature, a living thing, and it was testing them. They had always underestimated the unknown, but now they could see the truth. The rift was more than just an alien technology. It was an ancient consciousness, one that had been watching, waiting, and now it was judging them. She stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tumultuous energy. "We're not leaving without understanding this. We need to make contact. We need to reach the core." Cade's expression hardened. "Contact? With what? That thing is trying to kill us." "No," Royce replied, her eyes narrowing. "It's testing us. It wants to know if we're worthy, if we can control the power of the rift. We have to prove ourselves." Ven shot her a disbelieving look. "You're saying we have to pass some kind of test?" Royce nodded. "We're dealing with something ancient, something that's been here long before us. If we don't understand how it thinks, we'll never survive this." Without waiting for another response, Royce took a deep breath and stepped toward the orb. The energy in the room swelled around her, intensifying with each step, but she held her ground. She had to face it head-on. She had to show the rift they weren't just intruders. They were its equal. The voice came again, louder now, vibrating her bones. "You think you can control the rift? You are nothing. Weak. Fragile." Royce clenched her fists, her eyes locked on the orb as it pulsed faster, more erratically. "We are humanity," she said, her voice strong, her words cutting through the energy that surrounded her. "And we survive. We adapt. We endure. We control the rift, or we die trying." The orb's pulse slowed. The air around them seemed to settle, as if the energy itself was waiting. Royce could feel it now, a presence reaching out, testing her resolve. It was not just a force of nature. It was a force of will, a living entity, ancient and powerful. The room fell silent, and in that silence, the rift seemed to listen. "Prove it." The orb's pulse surged, but this time it was different. Royce could feel it. The connection between them had shifted. The rift was testing them, yes, but now it seemed to be waiting for something. And Royce was determined to give it what it needed. The orb before Royce pulsed with an almost sentient energy, its light now steady, no longer erratic. The room, once filled with the thunderous hum of the rift's raw power, had quieted. The pressure in the air was still thick, but it was no longer oppressive. It was as though the very heart of the rift had paused, awaiting their next move. "Prove it." The voice in Royce's mind repeated the challenge, but there was no longer anger in it, just a cold, impartial expectation. The orb's surface seemed to ripple with energy, responding to the unspoken words between them. She took a steadying breath, forcing her racing heart to slow. Her crew was watching her closely, Cade's and Ven's faces lit by the dim glow of their suits, their eyes filled with a mixture of disbelief and hope. For the first time, Royce allowed herself to believe they might actually succeed. But there was no time to doubt. They had to act now. "We're not backing down," Royce muttered under her breath, her fingers tightening around her sidearm. She wasn't sure what exactly they were supposed to prove to the rift, but she knew one thing: humanity was not a species to be dismissed. Cade moved to the console beside her, her fingers flying over the interface again. But this time, her gestures were deliberate, careful, as if she, too, understood that brute force wasn't the answer here. The orb shifted, its hum growing more harmonious with the room's energy field. The symbols on its surface danced, aligning with a sense of purpose Royce could almost understand, like they were calling her forward. The rift wasn't just reacting to them, it was listening, sensing their thoughts and intentions. It wasn't just a test of power. It was a test of humanity's core strength, our ability to adapt, to survive, to unite. "We need to offer something in return," Royce said, her voice low but confident. "We can't just demand control. We have to give it something." Ven frowned. "What could we possibly give it? It's beyond us, beyond anything we've ever known." Royce turned to face her, her eyes clear. "We offer it our will, our desire to preserve, to push forward, to survive against all odds. The rift wants to see if we can withstand the chaos it represents, if we can stand firm in the face of the unknown." Cade nodded slowly, as if understanding her reasoning. "It's not just power it wants. It's not about conquering the rift. It's about us showing that we won't break under its pressure." Royce stepped forward, her step slow but purposeful. The room around them seemed to hum, reacting to her movements. With each step, the energy seemed to pull tighter, creating a palpable connection between her and the orb. She raised her hand, palm out, just inches from the glowing surface of the orb. The voice came again, but this time it was quieter, more contemplative. "You think your strength lies in resistance? You are weak. Your bodies are fragile. Your minds can fracture with but a single thought." But Royce didn't flinch. She stood firm, her gaze locked on the orb's shifting light. "We don't resist," she said, her voice unwavering. "We endure, we adapt, we learn, and we never stop moving forward." The pulse of the orb flared brighter for a moment, as if it was testing her. The room trembled again, the walls vibrating with energy, and Royce could feel the pressure in her chest, the weight of the rift's presence pulling at her mind. But she held steady, her resolve not faltering. The rift had one last challenge for them, one that would either make or break them. A surge of energy shot out from the orb, striking the walls of the chamber and creating a massive rift in the fabric of the room. For a moment, the entire space seemed to bend, time itself stretching and warping in the wake of the energy blast. The team stumbled, thrown off balance by the intense force. But Royce remained upright, her eyes locked on the heart of the rift. "Now," Royce commanded, her voice steady through the chaos. "This is our chance. We can reach it. We can break the connection." Cade scrambled to the console, fingers flying across the interface, while Ven joined her, trying to make sense of the fractured data flooding in. The rift was unstable, the connection between them and the orb beginning to unravel. "Almost there," Cade muttered, sweat beading on her brow as the symbols on the console flickered rapidly. "It's like the whole system is fighting us, but we're winning. The rift is weakening." Royce stepped back, her gaze never leaving the orb. This was their moment. The rift had shown them its power, its endless patience, and now they had proven their resilience, their will to survive. The rift was beginning to acknowledge that. The orb pulsed once more, a final flare of energy that seemed to pause the world. And then, just as suddenly, everything went still. The hum of energy stopped. The walls stopped trembling. The room fell into an eerie, unnatural silence. For a heartbeat, nothing moved, nothing changed. Then, slowly, the orb dimmed. The light faded, and the energy that had once filled the room began to dissipate, retreating like the ebbing tide. The rift, it seemed, had accepted their challenge. "We did it," Cade whispered, her voice shaky with disbelief. "We actually did it." Royce stood tall, breathing heavily but with a sense of awe. The rift had been tamed, but at a cost. They had proven their strength, yes, but the true danger of the rift was not over. There was still much more to uncover about its origins, its purpose, and the consequences of what they had just done. But for now, they had taken the first step, and the galaxy had just been given a second chance. The stillness in the chamber was almost suffocating. The rift, once a chaotic storm of energy and danger, had calmed. The orb, now dull and lifeless, sat at the heart of the room, its once violent pulse reduced to a faint thrum. It was as if it had finally recognized the strength in the humans who had defied it. The weight of the past few days bore heavily on Royce's shoulders, but she couldn't help but feel a strange sense of accomplishment. The rift was no longer their enemy, it was a new beginning. "We did it," Ven whispered again, her voice tinged with awe as she stared at the now dormant orb. Her fingers hovered over the console, scanning the readings. "It's stable, for now." Royce stepped forward, her gaze still fixed on the orb. "For now," she repeated softly, "but we've only just begun to understand what we've done." Cade glanced up from her interface, her brow furrowed in concentration. "The rift's energy signature is completely altered. It's no longer a destructive force. It's more like a node, a point of convergence." She paused, her eyes widening. "It's connected to the galaxy. The entire structure, the rift itself, it's part of a greater network, one that spans the cosmos." Royce's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just a victory for humanity. It was a revelation. They hadn't just stopped the rift. They'd unlocked something far more profound. "This isn't just an anomaly," Royce said, her voice steady with realization. "It's a gateway, a channel connecting different parts of the galaxy, possibly even different realms of existence. We've discovered the link that holds the galaxy together." Ven's eyes lit up. "The potential, if we can learn to control this, we can end the wars, the resource shortages, the isolation. The rift could unite the galaxy, create a new era of peace." "It could also bring untold danger," Royce replied, her voice tinged with caution. "We don't know enough about it yet. It's been dormant for eons, and we've only scratched the surface." But Cade shook her head, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Maybe we're not meant to control it. Maybe we're just supposed to learn from it, to become part of it." Royce considered that, the words settling into her mind like a spark catching on dry kindling. The rift was not just a force to be tamed. It was something that humanity had to evolve to understand, something that could redefine their place in the universe. The challenge now was not to conquer the rift, but to join it, to become a part of its vast network, to learn to navigate its strange currents. As Royce looked at her team, she saw in their eyes the same realization. They had not just survived, they had opened a door to something far greater than themselves. The rift was no longer just a fracture in the galaxy. It was a bridge to something new, something beyond the limits of their current understanding. "We've changed the course of history," Royce said, her voice filled with quiet awe. "But it's not over. The rift may be calm for now, but we're only at the beginning of this journey. The galaxy won't wait for us to figure it out. There will be challenges ahead, new enemies, new allies, and forces beyond our comprehension." Ven clenched her fist, her resolve hardening. "We're ready." Royce nodded, feeling the weight of leadership settle comfortably on her shoulders. "We're ready, but remember, the rift has tested us. It has shown us the strength of humanity. It will never stop watching us, testing us. But if we remain steadfast, if we adapt, we will become more than we are. We will become the guardians of the rift. The team stood tall, their mission now clear. They had uncovered a secret older than the stars themselves, a secret that could either save the galaxy or destroy it. But they had one thing that the rift could never understand: human determination. As Royce turned away from the orb, she looked out at the vast expanse of space beyond the chamber's shattered walls. The galaxy was a much larger place than she had ever imagined, and humanity's place in it had just changed forever. There was no turning back now. The rift was open, and the universe was waiting. "We move forward," Royce declared, her voice strong, "together, as one." And with that, humanity's greatest challenge had only just begun.